Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. I'm an audiologist and coach. You are on the Steady Coach. Welcome to another Ask Dr. Yo video, which is a series of unedited videos in which I answer your questions. I have an entire playlist of these questions and answers on my channel, so check that out if you want more. Be sure to hit the subscribe button if you're new here, and we're going to jump right into the question, which is a very important one. That question is, what do you mean by medically unexplained chronic dizziness? Medically unexplained was in quotation marks here because many of you have what you may originally have thought of as medical explanations. You may have a diagnosis like MDDS or PPPD or vestibular migraine. You may be taking medications or have been given prescriptions for the condition that you have. You may notice physical changes in your body. For example, you may notice physical sway, or you may notice twitches in your eyes, nystagmus. Or you may have read some of the research showing that people with PPPD, for example, have changes in the processing of their brains that is different from those who do not have PPPD. Some of you may also have an original medical diagnosis that explains why your symptoms started, and you may wonder if your chronic symptoms then are medically explained. We're going to get into all of this. What I mean by medically unexplained essentially is just this. Medically unexplained chronic dizziness symptoms are dizziness symptoms that do not reflect a permanent, irreversible, or disease process that causes the symptoms to be chronic. Okay, both parts of that statement are important. The permanent, irreversible disease part and the chronic part. So for the first part, the permanent, irreversible disease process part, although those of you with PPPD, vestibular migraine, MDDS may notice physical changes in your body, may indeed have changes in some of the findings in some of the testing that you have done, this does not necessarily reflect anything more than a programming error in your brain, a reversible programming error in your brain. In other words, it does not fulfill the criteria of medically explained chronic dizziness because it's not an irreversible or damage-related process. So irreversible damage-related things would be like a neurological disorder that leads to withering of the nerve cells in your brain or in your body, or a tumor that destroyed part of your brain. Those things might be medical explanations for why your brain can't process sense information correctly right now. But if your brain is okay and there's no disease process, no lab test or diagnostic test has found a disease process, all of these diagnoses and all of the treatments that you're being given are just based on your symptoms. They're descriptions of symptoms in the case of the diagnoses, and then the treatments are basically just trying to stop the symptoms from happening. They're not really addressing the root issue, which is that your brain is not processing sense information correctly. Because ultimately, by the way, that's what dizziness is. It's when your brain has a mismatch between what it's expecting to happen and the sense information it's actually getting. If you want more on this, I've got tons more of explanations on this in my channel. So I'm going to link to some basics videos below. Check those out if you want to hear more about that. But yes, with MDDS, PPPD, vestibular migraine, they're medically explained in the sense that you may get medical treatment or they may have a name, but medically unexplained in the sense that these are not irreversible disease processes. So these absolutely qualify as medically unexplained chronic dizziness symptoms. Remember, I also said the second part of this equation was important too, and that's the chronic symptoms part. So many of you had symptoms that started with something like BPPV or benign paroxysmal positional vertigo. Or some of you have had symptoms that started with vestibular neuritis or labyrinthitis. Maybe you had permanent damage to one ear. Maybe you had a vestibular schwannoma, a tumor that affected the nerve function on one side. Maybe you even had to have it removed. Maybe you had a stroke that temporarily led to some issues in your brain's processing centers. Now, all of these conditions could potentially lead to permanent damage to some of the vestibular or balance-related structures. But in many cases, they don't necessarily explain chronic symptoms. And I've covered this in a lot more detail in a separate video about weakness on one side. I'll link to that in the video description as well. So if your symptoms started with one thing, a really important question to ask your doctor is not just, did my symptoms start with this, but does this explain why I have chronic symptoms? Do people who have this condition or had what I had, do they always end up with long-term symptoms? And if the answer is no, then we're back in medically unexplained chronic dizziness territory. And what we're probably dealing with here is a processing error. Your brain has the information it needs, it's just not using it correctly. It's misinterpreting sense data, and then it's responding to sense data and other triggers, external, like visual stimuli, and internal, like fear responses, like relationship issues, like stress, like fearful thoughts, all of those things as though they're dangerous. And that gets people into a chronic dizziness cycle. So I hope this answered the question and cleared things up. What's really important for me to emphasize here is that when we say medically unexplained, we don't mean in your head, psychological, or in your mind. Neural circuit dizziness is a brain-based issue. It is really happening. It's a brain-based issue that's really happening. Your brain really is processing information in a way that it maybe shouldn't right now, but it's a reversible process. That's what I want you to remember about this. All right. Questions, comments, drop them below. Please like this video, share it if you liked it, and subscribe to my channel. You can also follow this if you're listening to this as a podcast. Leave me a 5-star rating. All of these things help me reach more people. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.